Right, now, I'm going to talk about catalysts, and I'm going to talk about catalysts in a chemical context, but also in a context of human beings and the way that we inspire one another, or can be inspired. Now, start with a bit of chemistry. A catalyst, in chemical terms, and apologies, scientists, I know there are scientists in the room, please don't use this in your A-level chemistry because it will fail you, but I'm talking it down a bit, okay? Sort of, just for the civilians, you know what I mean? Okay. So a catalyst, it provides a new pathway for a chemical change. And that is true. It just provides an alternative way of getting from one place to another, of turning raw materials into really good products. And that's what chemists like to do. Now, Leon sort of mentioned that I'm also a teacher. Actually, I haven't taught for about 5 years, but I do lesson observations now as well. So I'm feeling really bad about 2 I did today, right at this moment, and really glad they're not here. I really love this quote, though. Every good teacher is a catalyst for creativity, a liberator. It's by Tim Smith, the guy who sort of did the Eden Project down in Cornwall. I like that quote because it links back to the chemistry thing as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But also, it's about that thing about how we can influence each other and other people and start something off. Catalysts are about just kick-starting something. They don't really get involved in the process to the extent that they're used up, they're regenerated at the end of it, they're still there, they can be used again. The other thing I like about that quote is that it applies to teachers, but it applies to all of us. We can all be teachers in that sense, inspiring others, because I'm a chemist, I'm a teacher, but I'm also a Christian, and a lot of that is about inspiring other people, inspiring myself. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Oh, one more thing. It describes a catalyst as a liberator. And I'm not sure quite how it's come out. It actually looks a lot more scientific than it did on my laptop, but that's the Greek word that the word catalyst comes from. It was invented, catalysts were sort of discovered about 100 years ago. And the word kataleo is a Greek word, and it basically means to release. So I quite like his definition of that. Now, at this point, I realise that I've translated a Greek word, and I've given you an inspirational quote, so it's beginning to sound like one of Leon's sermons. So probably best I get back to the chemistry. I'll move over here. I won't be on the rota for weeks now. Okay. Now, you've probably seen Brian Cox, who's on the TV. He's the guy who goes up mountains and goes wow at the universe and stuff like that. Well, he's not a chemist, he's a physicist. Now, chemists, we have our trendy-looking heroes as well. And this is my favourite chemist. Yes, I have a favourite chemist, don't we all? Fritz Haber. Some say he looks a bit like Dr. Evil. Just to avoid any confusion, I've got a handy guide. Dr. Evil, Fritz Haber. Now, he did have a complicated life, and if you read about him, it is very, very interesting and not the happiest of lives at all. But what he did for us, Fritz Haber, is probably one of the most important scientists of the 20th century, because about 50% of the food that we use in the world today it's grown based on fertilizers that he developed. He developed the process, which is called the Haber process, for making the raw materials for fertilizer. And if he hadn't done this, well, we'd be hungry, I guess. The raw material is called ammonia. Apologies, chemists, I know it's not quite right as well. But the product is called ammonia. And the raw materials are nitrogen, which you can get from the atmosphere, costs nothing, and hydrogen, which you can get from oil and coal and so on. And he knew that you could turn the one thing into the other, or the two things into the other, but he needed a catalyst to do it. And one of the things I want to tell you about catalysts is that you need the right catalyst for particular reactions. There is no sort of Swiss Army knife of catalyst that you can use for every single chemical reaction. You have to find the right one. So he tried loads of different catalysts. So different chemicals, different catalysts. So he had to try lots of different ones. And I think, in my experience as a teacher and working in education, and also as a Christian, I think different people do respond to different kinds of inspiration. Some people are inspired by music, some people are inspired by a word, all those different things, and teachers will know about differentiation and how we use those different ways of inspiring people. I think people are very much like chemicals in that respect. Haber tried lots of different catalysts, and he found the right one in the end. But he tried lots of expensive ones. A lot of catalysts are expensive. They're things like platinum, gold, things like that. And you know, if you ever put leaded petrol in your car catalytic converter and it kills it, they cost about £500. That's because there's a lot of platinum in them. The one he found, though, is just iron. Scrap iron worked, in fact. It didn't cost anything at all, basically, because, as I say, the catalyst gets regenerated at the end of the reaction, so you just use it again. And again, by the way, that was just to remind you it was fertilizer. Yes. And to show off to my kids that I can do PowerPoint. Yes. Yes. In meetings at work, they always say, "Did your kids do that for you?" Well, sort of. A little bit. The second thing about catalysts is the effect that matters, not the cost of the catalyst. He tried lots of expensive catalysts. A lot of them didn't work. Iron was the one that did work. And I'll have to say this the right way, but it's the impact that matters, not the quality of the performance. Now, the quality of this performance might not be that great, but I believe it's about getting the message across. And sometimes, when we're in a situation where God kind of says to us, you know, would you walk across the room, talk to that person? And we kind of think, actually, there's probably somebody better at it than me. Or I'll just make a mess of it, and we don't do it. But actually, there may not be anybody else to do it. And I think a lot of the time, it's just important to just do it and make sure it gets done. And it may not be that I play the best electric guitar in the world, but if the job gets done, that's good. And sometimes you do say, actually, at the end, well, we worshipped, and that's enough. Right, now, at this point, hopefully I'm halfway through. I don't know if Mark's still timing. He's not, good. I think we've done a lot of chemistry, so I think you're probably ready for the advanced material that I'm going to give to you. This is cutting-edge stuff now, or at least it was 20 years ago when I did the research. Okay. Very often, I've got an animation here. This is good. Yes. Are you watching, Benjamin? It's good. Very often, with a chemical reaction, you add the catalyst, and then you wait, and very often, actually, you get a reaction straight away. But sometimes you add the catalyst, and nothing happens. And you go kind of, well, a bit like this, actually. And that's what we scientists call a face palm, by the way. And yes, I know he's a physicist, really. So you think, oh dear, this is a waste of time. In research, I used to do a reaction that I'd got to get in at some ridiculously unearthly hour. Well, for me, it was about 8:30. And it took about 12 hours to do. And sometimes, if I'd got it wrong at 8:30, 12 hours later, everything wasted kind of thing. But we discovered a kind of reaction. It was to do with a thing called living polymerization, which is a great name. It wasn't that exciting, though. And what happened was that you had to wait a long time for the catalyst to take effect. It's unusual for catalysts, but there's a special class of catalysts that this happens. And so you would start it off, and then total disappointment. And the fact is, they call it an induction period, and mostly it's very short. But some catalysts have this very long induction period. And I think there's a lesson, and this is the biggest part of these 3 points that I'm bringing tonight. This is the one that really impacted on me. Sometimes you can do the inspirational thing, but it just doesn't seem to work. And you think, what a waste of time that was. You can have the meeting and hardly anybody turns up. You know, you can plan something and it just falls flat. And you think, that was a waste of time, and you're discouraged. But the main thing I want to pass on tonight is don't be discouraged. Because I bet there's teachers in the room tonight who can remember students and you think that was a waste of time. And then 12 months later or sometime later, you think, actually, they've remembered it. It's made a difference. And this is kind of my story. Hopefully we're at 9.5 minutes now. It's to do with the blue bottle. When I was about 12, I was at Britannia High School, which is now closed. Became an exclusion unit and then closed. It was great. I wasn't there when it was an exclusion unit. But it wasn't particularly inspirational. At about 12, I didn't have a particular thing I was interested in. I was kind of a jack of all trades, really. And our science teachers weren't particularly inspirational either. But one day, in fact, most of the time, we'd be copying notes out of books. And they were very strict, so it was quiet copying out of books was the order of the day. Great teaching. But we had a student teacher one time, And he wasn't great either. In fact, he couldn't even control the class, so it was copying out of books in a riot. So it wasn't particularly inspirational, but one day he was preparing for another class, and he prepared this experiment, which I now know is called the blue bottle experiment. And it basically looked a bit like this. It was a plastic bottle. If we had plastic when I was 12, I don't know. And what he did was he brought this bottle in. Mine's a bit slightly yellow. It does look like a hospital sample, as Ant said. And I just watched it. I'm going to have to put the microphone down for a second. That was the reaction I was going for. And then that happened. Yes, actually, it was more surprising than that. That's how surprising it was. Yes. Quantitatively, that's how surprising it was. And that happened, but he didn't say anything about it because he wasn't intending it for us. He was intending it for the following class. But I went kind of, ooh, not ooh, but I kind of went, that's interesting. But I didn't say anything to him, and I don't know what he was talking about. And he carried on being fairly awful at teaching. I don't know what happened afterwards particularly. But that moment, when I saw that, something changed in me. And I thought, that's interesting. And I didn't really think any more about it until about 5, maybe 6 or 7 years later. And I realised I'd decided to become a chemist. And largely it was because of that, because this blue bottle experiment, it was the only thing I could think of that had made me think, I really want to know how to do that, why that happened. And what I do in my job now is I don't really look at chemicals and I don't teach, but what I look at is what influences people to find out how you inspire them. Because you can't make people learn, but you can inspire them and you can get them to learn. And so that's what teachers do, really. And that is why I was blown away by the blue bottle 2 weeks ago. Because it came in and I was thinking, why did I agree to this? I thought it'd be so easy. It's just 10 minutes. 11 probably now. And then I saw that and I thought, yeah, I was kind of asking for a sign, Lord, but I didn't think it'd be 12 foot tall. So, just to finish off then, if I press the button. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I've got 2 questions really. The first one is, how can we encourage people who are like these delayed action catalysts? Because it's quite hard being that sort of person who does that stuff. Sometimes people can be that they talk about when they're evangelists, they'll talk about, they offer people the call and then they come up and so on. But actually, there's probably somebody else somewhere along the line who's done that hard part, So how do we encourage those people who do that stuff, who do the shaking hands at the door and who make sure the building's okay, all that kind of stuff. And secondly, sorry, really long, is there anything we don't do because it takes so long that we're unlikely to see the impact or because it's too much of a long shot? And the reason I think about that one is because our economy, our way of thinking is so different to the world's. What I see in the workplace is it going to be worth it financially? Can we do it? That sort of thing. Is it going to give us a bang for our buck straight away within the timescales we're thinking about? But God's economy is totally different. What we do today may be something God wants for 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. So those are the 2 questions. My name's Luke Adams, and thank you.